These mermaids, as he called them, were freely swimming through the wreck, accompanied by slender men in golden armor, wielding some sort of projectile weapons. I sent the man back to the brig for his own protection, but only a day later did we meet with the force known as the Ancients of Atalán. Their ability to harness the energy of the aethers astonish even Wormwood, who still steadfastly claims that he can replicate their technology with time and resources. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Into the Abyss, your semi-regular video blog podcast of everything about the Abyssal Realms. In this episode, we will cover the faction-focused topic of the Ancients of Atalán. They are an enigmatic and mysterious race of humanoid creatures that live in the sea, that can breathe water, and are looking to regain their former glory and rebuild their civilization and understand why their kingdom beneath the sea went away so many eons ago. In this episode, we'll talk all about the faction and what makes them special and go over many of the models and units in detail. And in particular, we will attempt to answer the following 4 questions. Just like every other faction-focused video in this series, we're really here to answer the following 4 questions. Who they are. 2, how do they play? What's their playstyle, the unit types, unit overview in detail, etc. And my opinions thereof. 3, what's cool about them? Why would you want to collect this force? What are the common themes with the force? Why are they cool? What makes them special? What makes them different? And what would be resonant in the play style to make you want to play these guys? And then number 4, what I've learned about playing them or playing against them on my channel. Full transparency, I've only played Ancients of Atalán a few handful of times. I've played them enough to feel like I know what I'm doing, but they're not my primary faction. The majority of my experience with the Ancients of Atalán is playing against them. And I'll tell you all about what I've learned about playing against them and how that relates to activities on the tabletop. So sit back and relax and enjoy, and I hope you like what you listen to here on this particular podcast, and we're just going to jump right in and learn all about the Ancients of Atalán. Let's start by first answering the question, who are the Ancients of Atalán? And first, before we even do that, let's cover the setting. Deep Wars is set in an alternate history of the late 17th century. A mysterious undersea world and continent was found underneath the Earth's southernmost pole, basically under Antarctica. This amazing discovery by Earth explorers began a cascade of fortune seekers, scientists, scoundrels, and others searching for gold and treasure and glory, and the previously undiscovered land of the lost had riches beyond imagining that could be found. Ancient technology recovered from their first excursions on land from the fortune hunters faction, which are the humans in this world, has allowed these adventurers to develop new ether-powered dive suits and weapons and return to the bottom of the underground sea to battle with deadly marine enemies to get these powerful artifacts and golden treasure on the seafloor. That's the world in which the Ancients of Atalán have bequeathed to many of the other factions. They are descendants of an elder faction, and that's one of the reasons they are so important, because they are deeply embedded in the lore of this game. So who are the Ataláns? So as legend tells in the lore, the Ancients of Atalán are descendants of the last true elder race of the Underlands. And so who is this elder race? Well, nobody really knows. The elder race was a really, really ancient race who built a civilization, built these monolithic temples on land, and elegant towers of crystal and metal on the bottom of the sea floor. And they were, just ancient beyond reckoning. And they became further and further twisted by their experimentation with ether magic, ether crystals, and warping them to, summon ether magic, really kind of twisted these creatures. And over time, they became these unholy creatures that kind of had beyond the vision of the wisdom of what they had originally been, and they became very enigmatic and completely disconnected to the other beings of the world. And so at some point they left behind this world and they left, and their faction splintered into those who left and those who remained. And some of those left were sorceresses to act as kind of keepers of the Underlands, controlling the savages that had just migrated to the underground realm. Now, again, this is all in the distant past of what we now know as the Deep Wars universe. No real trace of the elder beings remains, save the artifacts and the structures, and the Abyssal Empire, kind of the Amazons that live in the Shadow Sea, are kind of a testament to kind of worshiping or just knowing about these ancient beings, and have some level of information that they're a little bit wary to share a whole lot of details with the fortune hunters that have come down. And that's how we know of all of this underland world, is the tales that the fortune hunters tell through what a Dr. Wormwood and the other professors and other explorers have written down in their journals as they explored this world. But from what we can gather from the fortune hunters, the sect of Atalán was a small group that rebelled against the decadence of their leaders, this elder race. And they traveled out to the open sea and the surface world to create their own kingdom. And then somehow, they splintered away from that elder race and became, over time and eons, became disconnected with them. And eventually, as those elder beings left, these Ataláns were now their own society. Interesting side note is that I just mentioned that this elder race splintered, and the Ancients of Atalán, or the Atalán sect, became one of those fragments of that ancient culture that ancient culture, having departed this world, left this world, no longer here. The Ataláns remain as kind of, I don't want to say the purest form of them, but maybe more closely aligned with kind of what they were or what they were supposed to be. The other splinter, or the other fraction of the ancient elder race that split apart once the elders left, eventually became the Dark Mariners. They continued to play with the ether magic. They continued to play with the dark gods. They continued kind of going down that path and really going down that mutation, and playing with dark powers that ought not be meddled with. And we talked about that in our last faction focus video. The Dark Mariners are really the true evolution of the evil twisting of that sort of paradigm. But back to the Abyssals and the Ancients of Atalán, the Ancients being the focus of this particular faction focus, and how they interact with the world, and how the Ancients of Atalán are connected with the Abyssals. The sorceresses of the Abyssal Empire spoke of these beings with reverence, claiming that the gods had finally returned. When the Abyssals see the Ancients of Atalán returning, kind of re-engaging with the world, they see that the gods have finally returned from their exile to reclaim what was taken from them by their elders. And so these elders, this elder race that we speak of, left a lot of ether crystals and ancient technology that's very hard to reproduce, and this dwindling technology that doesn't seem to be replaceable or is very hard to replace. These Ancients of Atalán sort of represent them coming home, and the notion of rebuilding their empire through finding these artifacts, using these artifacts, and a sense of the Ancients of Atalán are searching somehow, for some reason, to find out what happened to the elder race and reconnect with them. And that's how we know the Ancients of Atalán. Other things about the Ancients of Atalán that are kind of interesting are that, for whatever reason, their race seems to be dwindling. Their numbers are few. They try to be secluded. They are not necessarily historically warlike. They kind of shy away from combat. They shy away from violence. Their numbers are dwindling. They do not have a lot of numbers to spare in combat. However, that is changing with kind of the new leader of their race called Alahal. He's encouraging them to become more warlike and become more aggressive. Let's retake our place in this world. But in general, they're kind of thought of as a little bit not necessarily xenophobic, but they're isolationist, maybe is a better word, is kind of generally, I think, how they're sort of described or thought of. They're also, in envisioned as soldiers that are nimble. They have lighter armor, but they're nimble and graceful. And they use this incredibly they use this incredibly advanced technology to shoot like these micro beams of light that just slice body parts off, or penetrate armor with the greatest of ease. Or they've got very precise blades that slice right through armor, and that technology is pretty rare, and so they hold on to it. But there's stories of female Atalán sorceresses that use this horrible magic that slaughter their souls, slaughter the enemies right in front of them, and the soldiers that have these interesting or these wild looking rifles that cut out with these thin beams of light that cut through their armored suits of the fortune hunters with the greatest of ease. As well as there's these massive mechanoid sea creatures that somehow some of these sorcerers kind of control, that are the mechanical constructs, and they're very lithe and graceful, but they also are patterned off of indigenous sea life, like sharks or eels, or other types of sea life, like manta rays. They're graceful in their own right, but they're mechanical and they're controlled. And so there's this interesting dichotomy of very precise, very hard hitting, not intending to be violent, but now they're kind of finding their way through their world and back into the world, and they're realizing that they're going to have to fight for survival. But they're also I get this sense that there's this sadness around this race. Okay, we're dwindling. We've lost our connection to our parents, as you were. We've lost our connection to the ancient race that made us something special, or the connection to a deep history with this world, and that they're searching to kind of find that connection. Hopefully they can stabilize their race so that they don't go into extinction. So let's move on from the specifics of the lore, just the pure lore aspects of this race, and let's move on to a little bit like who they are physically. Let's go into physiology and kind of how they operate. So it is undeniable that the Ancients of Atalán are descendant of this race. They use a lot of the same tech that the ancients or the elder race used to use. They use, they use ether crystals in a lot of their technology. They are magic users and magic capable, and we'll talk a lot about that as we move on. And we know that they are, coming back, and they're looking to establish a new colony, or establish new connections to this world, and they are no longer in the shadows. Sailors from that portion of the world that have seen these creatures originally believed them mermaids. It is true that they are now sea creatures. They are not mermaids. There's actual mermaids in the game, and that's called the Nereid faction. We'll cover that at some point soon. But originally, fortune hunter sailors believed these creatures to be mermaids, but they are not. They are actually adapted ancient beings that now have adapted to indeed breathe water through gills on the sides of their necks. Let's talk a little bit about the physiology of these guys. So the Ancients of Atalán are humanoid shaped. They are slender. They're generally very light of build. They wear fully enclosed suits. But when they're wearing armor, and if they want to go on land, they actually are no longer adapted to breathe air. They are breathe 100% through gills, and if they go on land, they have to be in enclosed suits that allow them to breathe through through water. Through Dr. Wormwood's, novelizations, or within his journals, they're very clear that these creatures are now 100% water-born creatures. They're completely incapable of life above the surface without these support devices. So these beings use, if they are in foul water, they'll use purification systems to, supply clean seawater so their suits so they can breathe. Like I said, their bodies are long and slender. Sometimes they have webbed feet, and others have more humanoid features. There's a little bit of a range there. The legends of them describe them kind of originally as peaceful beings, rarely venturing to the surface and never attacking the ships of men. So it may be that they are reluctant warriors in the past, but again, there's a new guy on the block, and he's starting to push them in a little bit different direction. Their passive nature may explain their relatively weak armor. One of the hallmarks of this faction as you play the game is that their armor is relatively weak. And that's something you kind of have to consider as you're putting together your force. And you can kind of balance that with some of their mechanical constructs. But the individual troopers' armor, they're very weakly armored. And their weapons are very precise and do a lot of, very pinpoint damage. But they are all just, they're thin armor. They're very streamlined diving suits to protect them from the cold and the heat and whatnot, but they offer little protection from physical attack. And so the fortune hunters noticed this when they were starting to, encounter aggressive Atalans, is that, the Atalans are shooting their ray guns at them and they're slicing them up left, right, and center from a distance. But once they closed with them and got within hand-to-hand distance of them, the fortune hunters actually could handle them quite well. And their hand-to-hand weapons were actually pretty brutal against that Atalan slender physique and their very thin armor. Some of the females of the species do not wear suits at all. They protect themselves by controlling the water temperature and purity of the water around them. And these sorceresses appear to have the power of ethers of their counterparts on land, the Axabalan Empire. And they're capable of controlling the flow of water to create deadly swirls that can, sweep enemies away or distort them, or blasts of intense pressure and rupturing boiling walls of water or undersea volcanoes. And they can also fire intense beams of light from their hands, kind of channeling the ether power, much like the rifles that some of the soldiers use. The sorceresses or the magic users can do similar things, just like blasting from their hands. Another hallmark of this race is their use and adaptation of very advanced ether technology, far beyond any of the other races. Their weapons are very deadly, and they tend to be, we talked a little bit about them being precise. And as this translates into the rules, they're actually very adept at using the keyword or the special rule precise. They don't have quite as many minuses when targeting subsystems, which is actually really key, because they can actually take out subsystems with a relative ease, compared to the other factions. They use weapons and hit targets at a long range. They tend to be a little bit more of the longer ranged faction, and you tend to not want to get the living models into hand-to-hand. They don't tend to be very good hand-to-hand combatants. These guys really tend to excel at range. And the warriors of this faction also tend to favor very elegant, precise weapons. They kind of shun or forego explosives or crude clubs or anything that's kind of crude and bludgeoning, or kind of like mass collateral damage. These guys aren't into that. They're into laser, rapid strike, pinpoint strike. They are the scalpel in a world of bludgeons. So, something to kind of think about as you're putting together your forces. The population of the Ancients of Atalán is small compared to the other forces. Like I talked about a little bit earlier, there's not a lot of Ancients of Atalán in this world. And very few have made the trip to the Underlands, or the Shadow Sea, or the land of where, the land and the sea meet, underneath the continent, that kind of that land of the lost area that I was talking about. They tend to bring mechanical constructs with them to assist them with salvaging artifacts. Really, their trips are all about salvaging these artifacts in a desperate attempt to reconnect with the elders. Basically, their trips into the Shadow Sea represent the efforts of a dying civilization trying to come back and reclaim their place in the world. So they would prefer not to do it violently, but they are trying. There's an element of survival with this faction, and I think about the Ancients of Atalán, is that there's a really kind of a poignant storyline behind these guys. They're dying. Their race is dying, and they're generally not violent, but there's this kind of there's this sadness about them, right? And it's like, okay, we are on the last legs. We're trying to survive. We know the light is going out. But let's see if we can forego that light going out for as long as possible. So that's in general kind of the lore of the faction and the race of the Ancients of Atalán. We'll talk a little bit more about Atlal the Immortal. He's kind of like I said, he's the newcomer on the block who's kind of pushing these guys to be a little less pacifist and a little bit more violent. We'll talk more about that, but that does flavor the faction in interesting ways when you include him in the force. But let's talk a little bit about how these guys play on the tabletop. And the lore and how they play on the tabletop, I think, are very well aligned. And I think that's generally true of all of the factions in Deep Wars and Shadowsea, but I think it's particularly true with the Ancients of Atalán. I think when you think of types of factions, you think of the rock, paper, scissors sort of paradigm of different war games. Sometimes you've got your shooty faction, sometimes you've got your magic faction, sometimes you've got your heavily armored faction that can't necessarily deal a blow but can take a punch. I think it's a little bit more subtle than that with the Ancients of Atalán. I think in general, when I think of the Ancients of Atalán, I think their magic is very strong. I think their constructs are strong, and I think you've got to be diligent about how you include your constructs and how you play them. They've got some good constructs, but a couple of them are pretty expensive, and you do need to pay for the control model in terms of somebody that can use can use animist ability or use any ability that's going to be able to control those constructs. You need to think about shooting and how you're going to get board position with these guys so that you can maximally fire and probably target subsystems I think the goal with the Ancients of Atalán is not necessarily to kind of brutally kill the opponent. I think you're more going to try to remove their ability to wage war. And how are you going to do that? You're going to use control magic spells. You're going to use offensive magic spells for sure, and that's going to be very powerful with the Ancients of Atalán. But with your physical combat, you're going to really rely more on long range shooting. You're probably going to want to target subsystems to shoot off, weapons, or you're going to try to shoot off legs, locomotion, so that you can stop them from getting to you. You're probably going to try to do headshots so that you can maybe do gruesome kills, things of that nature. You as an Ancients of Atalán player are not going to survive a protracted combat with any other faction. You have to find ways to surgically remove models or surgically remove models' ability to wage war against you. And so that's, I guess, to me, that's how this faction plays. They're not really the shooty faction. They're more of the precision faction backed up with really strong magic is the way I would characterize these guys. And so as you kind of look through the models and the offerings of the rule set and how the rules of the models and how they play, that'll kind of become apparent. And so I think, like I said, the rules and the lore are very well aligned with what the Ancients of Atalán can do. And so it's interesting to explore because as a tactical war game, it's interesting that on some level, you're playing a pacifist organization or a pacifist race when you're playing the Ancients of Atalán. And sometimes that becomes a little bit apparent. And sometimes that's a little bit, you kind of have to get your head around how these guys operate. It's like you are not trying to just go shoot them or beat them to a pulp. You are being very precise with the way that you are handling incoming enemies. And so let's maybe, kind of take a step away from the lore and how the faction plays kind of in general terms. And let's move on to unit types and kind of rules discussion and rules overview and let's deep dive into each one of these units and kind of describe how each one of them plays and how they look on the tabletop. All right, as with the other faction focused videos, we're going to start our exploration of the Ancients of Atalán with the personality models, in particular the leaders, the spellcasters, the support leader types like the ones that control artificial constructs, things of that nature. And so I think kind of your basic frontline leader of the Ancients of Atalán is captured in this character here. It's called Tachuli, Captain of Atalán. He's 170 points. He's a personality model, quality 3, combat 3, reasonably normal strength and resistance, a pretty good will stat. Not bad. A 3+ on the will stat. He is basically kind of your standard frontline leader. This guy is going to help buff your living model troops. He's a leader, so he gives +1 activations within a long stick. Shooter medium for the gun that he has. Ether Tech 2 and Marine. So he he operates underwater. He can walk on land with a Sea Breather tech device by adding 5 points. So if you're going to play this guy in Shadow Sea, you have to add a rebreather. So that's not a big deal. It's only 5 points, but it's something you need to pay attention to. So again, 170 points. Sorry, 107 points. That'd be a big difference. 107 points buys you kind of your frontline leader type. Let's take a look at his weapons and his armor and whatnot. So he's got a hyper cavitation pistol, which is +1, which is a projectile long, which is interesting, +1, and armor break 1. Does require a reload. And his preferred hand-to-hand weapon is a micro edge blade of +1. So with a combat 3, and let's say you're doing shooting with a +1 on your shooting weapon there, that's not bad. Combat 4 takes a reload, so you need to spend an action to reload that guy. Pretty light armor in general, but pretty good for a living Atalán model of body armor 2. So, that's not bad. Not bad at all. This guy is pretty standard stuff. I mean, there's nothing super exceptional about him. Other than, for an Atalán and a leader, he's got 4 wounds on the body, so that's really good. Ataláns don't, particularly the personality models, there's not a ton of them that have 4 wounds on the body, so that's actually really good. He is able to shoot his hypercavitation pistol, which has a little bit of armor break, and it's got a +1, so it's not too bad. Really, what you're looking for this guy to do is if you're taking troops, he would be good as a cheaper alternative to a Lahal to give quality bonuses to your troops. You're probably not going to get a whole lot of work out of him. At a combat 3 and a body armor 2, I'm not sure that I would want to get this guy in hand-to-hand combat a ton. But he does have a micro edge blade, which is precise. So you could target a subsystem. And, hopefully, like if you charge and you target a subsystem, let's say you target the legs, you sweep the leg on somebody, right? Particularly a trooper model who might only have 1 or 2 wound boxes in the leg. And then, you basically immobilize them. So there's going to be a theme here where you can use precise weapons to do things like weapon shots or head shots or leg shots. And at combat 3 and precise and a hand-to-hand or a projectile weapon of +1, that's not amazing. But it's also, it's not bad. At a 107 point package, I think he's a completely reasonable frontline leader. Now, you can go completely hog wild and go with a Lahal, who is significantly more points, and we'll talk about him in a minute, but that's a big investment. He's 236 points. We'll get to him in a little bit. But, good frontline leader, probably good to have in your collection to be able to give quality buffs to your soldier type models. The next personality model that we're going to explore here a little bit is the Acolyte of the Ethers. I really like this model. I mean, the sculpt is fantastic. So but I like this model because you get a lot of really good stuff in a pretty points efficient package. So this is a scientist model. So, if you're playing specific scenarios where you need to activate devices or, do things that require a scientist to kind of be fully effective at the role or fully effective at the mission, a 73-point scientist, you can't go wrong. Quality 4, combat 2, those are scientist stats. I mean, I'm not surprised by that. You're not putting this person into harm's way, or if you are, you might think twice about your strategy, or you're just in desperate trouble. But standard strength and will stats for an Atalán trooper type. Pistol of +1, a staff of +0, and body armor of 1. Very standard trooper level secondary stats and armor and weapons and whatnot. Again, this is a scientist, can use tech level 1 or 2 devices, and you know, you use this model with whenever you need to do some specific activations or specific activities with things that you need to interact with in this scenario. So 3 wounds on the body, which is pretty good. You know, the head and the locomotion are both at 2. Body armor or armor all around is pretty weak. So you, again, trying to keep this person out of harm's way. And you know, some pretty standard war gear as well. You know, crystal imagers so you can see in darkness. You'll find that fairly common. A propulsion system so they can swim. There's some rules around that. +1 resistance roll for the EnviroSuit armor, which is great. And I think that's already calculated above. But I think that the weapons on this one, being pistol of complexity level 2, energy medium +1, precise and refract. Let's look up at the precise rules. You get a bonus when targeting subsystems. That's really kind of the neat thing about that. Again, normally when you target a subsystem, there's a minus. So usually, like with the with the head, it doesn't help as much, but it's certainly kind of makes it a little bit easier. But with the subsystems, it completely negates any of the penalties shooting, like at a hand or a weapon, or hand weapon, or locomotion. So that's actually not bad. That's not bad at all. Again, if you want to put this person, or you want to put this character in Shadowsea, you're going to want to buy that rebreather on the front of that card. So no big surprise there. But I think the thing here is that for 73 points, you've got a scientist model that's actually pretty darn decent. You're not going to do much more than scientist stuff with this person, but for a 73 point model that's got that ability, not bad. Not bad at all. All right, next up on our parade of personality models is one of the most important, I feel, one of the most important models in the Atalán line, and that is Matlal the Elder, Technologist of Atalán. He is a 112 point personality model, quality 2, combat 2. That quality 2 is amazing. So he activates quite easily. He's got victim stats for strength and resistance, but part of that is because he's corrupted. This guy is from a lore perspective, this character is very frail. You go back to the back of the card, notes and info. The oldest and wisest of the ancients, Matlal is the Matlal is the keeper of the technology for the Force. His main role is in designing mechanical constructs, but he's always on a quest to find new artifacts. He has a weakness for shiny things. So he's frail, he's old, he is not a physical guy, he's more of a thinker guy. But really what you're doing with him is you are putting him in, frankly, any force that you're going to have mechanical constructs in. So the Tyrannoform assault mech, the Hydroform mech, the Mantiform mech, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. All of those are going to benefit from this guy. I have this model. I love the model. He's wonderfully skinny and kind of frail, and just a beautiful little sculpt. And he is dynamite with regards to keeping your mechanical constructs moving in the right direction and doing the most work for you. So let's talk a little bit about him. Again, quality 2, combat 2. If this guy gets into combat, you are in trouble. You do not get this guy in combat. He stays away from combat. And he's got a lot of tools to do that too. So we'll talk about that in a moment. Really bad strength and resistances. He doesn't do well in situations where you have to pull against a current, or if he has to resist some sort of spell effect. Will is pretty decent. Not bad there. He's got kind of standard Atalán thin armor. He's got a beam pistol, which is a medium shooter, which is fine. If you need to take a pot shot with a couple of extra actions, you are on quality 2. Normally, this guy is going to be kind of hanging back from the mechs a little bit. and keeping them powered up with quality, or activation bonuses. And he is going to try to hide as much as he can while still staying within range of his mechs. Like I said, he's an animist. So this guy gives +1 activation for artificial mech constructs within a long stick. So you want to keep him within a long stick of your constructs. If he's killed, the mechs continue to operate. The other part of being an animist is that he can cast elemental conjuration spells. So instead of trying to use that pistol, I feel 99 times out of 100, the better option for him is to try to cast some sort of elemental conjuration spells. We'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about the magic capabilities of this force. But don't forget that not only is he kind of like the Biomancer with the Dark Mariners, not only does he control the biomechs, but he's also a spellcaster. Same thing here. Not only does this guy keep your mechs moving forward in the right direction, he casts spells, so don't forget that. Shooter medium, we talked about that a little bit. He can shoot, but honestly, if you're shooting that gun, something has gone a little bit wrong. This is interesting. He's greedy. So we talked about in his lore or the notes and info there that he can't shiny objects. He's distracted. He is the mad scientist. He's this, I just imagine this crazy old coot who is just like, he just sees a shiny thing and he just cannot resist it. If a treasure object is within the field of view, he must try to go pick it up. So keep him away, quite frankly. You don't want this guy going out front and potentially getting whacked by some errant shot or some long bomb charge from some Nereid who's activating on 2s and either gets heroic or gets 3 activations and charges from downtown. He'll die. So you kind of want to keep him back. He can resist it with a will check with 2 successes. Now, the good news is that he can resist that greediness by getting at least 2 3-ups on 3 2 3-ups on at least 3 dice. So all is not lost there, but just don't put yourself in that position. Corrupted, physical activities are hard for him, so he resistance checks and will checks are at -1 except morale. So, the -1 from the corrupted and +1 from the body armor kind of, give it a wash. But there are some situations where you are going to be at a 4-up, where your armor doesn't count. Again, Marine, he operates underwater. If you want to put him in Shadow Sea, you got to give him a rebreather. Let's take a look at the back. So body of 3, pretty standard locomotion, head, and weapons of 2. Again, pretty standard. Beam pistol, energy, medium +1. Not horrible, but again, if you're using that, you're probably in trouble. The ghost device is really interesting. We'll talk about the other stuff. I mean, he's got a crystal imager, so he can, he basically has deep eyes, so you don't have to worry about darkness. He's got his propulsion system. He's got a refractor field, which is interesting too. So the last 2 special items on this guy are really worth talking about. So ghost device gives him dimensional shift. To do 1 move for 2 actions, can move through obstacles while shifting and immune to attack, but he cannot attack back. So that's basically like he just kind of, he walking against the wind, kind of ghosts against something. Is like you can actually spend some actions to get him out of trouble, which is really cool because that's fantastic. Now, again, you can get 1 move using 2 actions, but you get to go through terrain. Like if your back is up against the wall, you can just kind of phase through that terrain and get away from somebody who's trying to eat you, right? So that's pretty cool. Refractive field, if you're hiding, you have to, no action for 1 turn. You're immune to range attacks or spells, and hand-to-hand attackers are at -2. That's pretty interesting, right? Ambush bonus after hiding. Echolocation negates that. So if the attacking model has the special rule echolocate, this doesn't help you. But if you're hiding, right, basically no action for 1 turn, you're immune to ranged attacks and spells in hand-to-hand. So if you plop this guy in a good spot where he can control the mechs, and your mechs are maybe kind of hanging out within a long stick and they're planking things from a distance, hey, it's not necessarily the worst thing to be a little bit in the open because they won't necessarily be able to be attacked, right? Because He's got the refractive field if he's hiding. So I think in general, for a 112 point package, if you're going to have any kind of artificial construct mech in your list, you have to have Matt Lal. He's fantastic. I mean, you could give some other model a control device if you really wanted to, but this guy's got a lot of really good stuff. He can control any number of mechs, and fantastic model. He keeps those mechs really effective. So going down the list again, we're talking about personality models. The next personality model that I want to talk about is Zakana, the Elementalist of Atalán. She is 152 points, personality model, quality 2, combat 2. Again, with that quality 2 on the personality models, that is fantastic. Strength and resistances are, normal. But the will is really good. Look at that 2 up on the will. Staff physical attacks are +0. Body armor of 1. Again, standard Atalán armor. The interesting part about this is there's a dodge. Projectile enemy rolls are at -2. She can dodge attacks, which I have forgotten in games that I've played with her. And she also has energy ranged attacks, and rolls are at -4 with her. So you see that combat 2, that looks pretty darn scary, right? It's like, oh God, I don't want to get her anywhere near, certainly do not want her anywhere near hand-to-hand with a staff of +0 and a combat 2. But you also don't want her anywhere near shooting, because like someone's just going to plink you right off the board. But you've got some defenses. Projectile attacks, enemy rolls are at -2 with a dodge, and energy ranged attacks and spells are at -4. That's good. That's really darn good. She is expensive, but I think you get a lot for that package. So let's look at the special abilities. She's an elementalist, so she can cast elemental spells, but gains +1 to spell casting roll. So you're already at quality 2, so you're at 2. Elemental attacks versus her are -1. So if somebody's attacking her with an elemental spell, she's the master of elemental magic, right? So she is not bothered by your puny elemental spells. Again, dodge. Attacker must win in combat by 1 point to cause an injury, regardless of the armor break of the weapon, right? Energy resistance. She attacks. Her energy attacks and attack spells are at -2. No effect from boiling water or lava. Stacks with energy shield. And energy shield are all ranged attacks, and attack spells are at -2. So that's kind of where you get that -4 above on the card there. She's swimming. She can move underwater. All that standard stuff. She's got deep eyes, which is interesting. She doesn't have the crystal imager. She's got deep eyes. That's interesting. Marine, again, same thing. You're going to play Shadow Sea. You got to get a rebreather. 3 wounds on the body, 2 on the head. And 2 on the locomotion and 2 on the weapons. Pretty standard stuff. Staff of +0 and withering glance of 0. You don't want her in hand-to-hand. Trust me, you do not want her in hand-to-hand. And she is kind of one of those ones where we talked about in the lore, she's got the bear skin. She does not have really any armor to speak of. She does have body armor of 1. I think there is there's an interesting typo here on the body armor. There's a 1 on the card up here on the shield, but on the card below it's 0. So I think you go with what's on the armor section at the bottom of the card. But in general, I think she's a potent spellcaster, right? And she's actually, quite frankly, very survivable against ranged attacks. So you want to keep her a little bit back or keep her a little bit dicey. She's got the quality to have spell points and do some movement, or if you want to kind of hang back in the early turns and conjure up spell points, and then kind of keep her cagey in the backfield and start slinging some elemental spells. I generally play aggressively, and I think in one game I got a little too aggressive and got her too far upfield. I might have even forgot her dodge and whatnot, and she got killed pretty quickly. So it's not like she is completely invincible. She's not completely a ninja. You will lose her if you don't play her well. But but she's got game. She can kind of hang back and sling a lot of spells. The next personality model that I want to talk about is the Conjurer of the Ethers. It's a 103 point personality model. She is kind of a I want to say like a cheaper version of Zakanna, but that's not exactly true. She's a conjurer. Well, let's go back and talk about her stats. Quality 3, combat 2. 5s for strength and resistance, will of 3, familiar body armor stats, and staff, so +0 on that, and 1 on the body armor. She's a conjurer, right? So she's activating on 3s. She can cast conjuration spells from elemental and psychic magic lists, but not attack spells. So that's interesting. So she is able to cast psychic magic, which is fantastic. And I think even in the lore, you read in the book, like at one point, a Atalán sorceress was, putting crazy thoughts into some fortune hunter's head and kind of made him go mad. I think that's what we're talking about here, is that the conjurer can cast spells that are elemental and psychic, but not attack spells. So you're thinking control type spells like walls or, what have you in the psychic list. We'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But for roughly 50 points less, you've got an interesting spellcaster. Pretty close stats, not quite as good on the quality. She's also got dodge, right? Ether Tech 2, Deep Eyes, Swimming, and Marine, all the standard stuff there. Again, if you want to play Shadow Sea, you got to get the Rebreather. Swimming, standard stuff, Deep Eyes, Normal Vision, and Darkness. So I'm wondering if this Deep Eyes is because they are magic users and they can use magic somehow to see, and they don't actually have big bulbous eyes. I think that's kind of what the thinking was there. There are basically the lore on these characters are, there are a few of these sources is still serving Zakanna. They do not possess the sheer power of destruction that she does, hence the conjuration spells and the elemental but not attack spells. They do not have the destructive capabilities that Zakanna does, but they do have a more rounded magical capability. So think of this one as a little bit more of a control caster and less of an attack caster, putting up walls, blocking lines of charging or blocking lines of vision for your enemy, not necessarily dealing damage, but controlling the board for the enemy. So staff, weapon, hand-to-hand +0, armor, really poor. Or frankly non-existent. So there's some interesting special items here. So she's got a cloaking field. You can activate the cloaking field with one action. It gives her immunity to ranged attacks and spells within one short stick of scenic terrain. So one of my buddies in the battle reports have used this pretty effectively. You can either hang her back or you can put her midfield, and as long as you're next to scenic terrain like coral or rocks or what have you, you spend an action to activate that cloaking field. She blends right in. You can't attack her with a ranged attack or a spell. That's pretty darn good. And with a with a combat 2 model, you do not want her getting shot because she's probably going to die. Her other special item is a hypnotic stone. So you activate it with one action, and you target one enemy and use 1 or 2 actions to hypnotize it. And the range of that hypnotic stone is based on how many actions you pump into it. So with one action, it's a short stick, 2 actions, it's a medium stick. The target has to roll a will check with 2 successes or be transfixed. Doesn't work on artificial or undead models. So, and it requires so if you want to shoot this thing at medium range, it requires 3 actions. 1 to activate it, 2 to get the medium stick, which causes a will check. Now, that sounds pretty decent on the surface. However, it's going to take you a fully loaded activation to get that thing off at any appreciable distance. I suppose, I guess I'm trying to think through, I suppose normally you're not going to use this in any kind of offensive way. I think maybe if for some reason you got charged, but they didn't attack you or they didn't kill you and you're in hand-to-hand and you don't like the idea of trying to get away with a free hack, maybe you use this hypnotic stone to transfix an enemy that's in hand-to-hand with you so that they don't hack you next turn. I suppose that's a possibility. I guess I feel like the hypnotic stone might be just a little bit situational for kind of practical use. But prove me wrong. Tell me how you have used the hypnotic stone to maximum effect. I'd love to hear your strategy there. But I think the Conjurer of the Ethers is a great model. Love the sculpt. I think it's a very effective model. I like the quality 3. I like the ability to use the kind of the control style magic. I think she's got a really good toolbox for survivability with that cloaking field. This is one of my more favorite Atalán models because I really like toolbox models, and particularly when I look at the combat too, it's just not very survivable, but you add to that the dodge ability and the cloaking field. I think you've got a winner. So if you don't have the points for Zakana, consider Conjurer of the Ethers. Conjurer of the Ethers. I think you'll be happy. Okay, going down the list a little bit more for personality models, we will land on the Medic of Atalán. 106 points, personality model, quality 3, combat 3. We're back up to combat 3 instead of combat 2. Standard human or standard living model stats for secondary stats. Micro-edge blade of +1, body armor of 1. Really what this guy's role is he's a healer. So if you want to keep living models alive, you can keep this guy around. Maybe if he's next to a leader, you're activating him on 2s instead of 3s. You can spend action points from this guy to put wounds back on your other wounded models, or bring a dead model back to life. As long as it wasn't gruesomely killed, you can bring a model back to life. That's pretty darn good. You keep your assault soldiers, or you keep your other living models alive, your spellcasters that maybe took a stray shot. That's not nothing. And keeping those very effective shooters or those very effective spellcasters in the game for another turn is good. It's 106 points. So let's look at what he does in terms of, instead of just above and beyond just pure healing, what does he do? He's not particularly effective in combat. With that combat 3, it's not horrible, but his hand-to-hand weapon is +1. But again, you're not really looking to get this guy into hand-to-hand. He has no ranged weapons, so you're not holding him back to shoot. You're really, if you're going to put this guy in your list, and I've not ever used this guy, and I don't think I've ever played against this guy. I'm just kind of looking at the stat card here. But if you're going to play this guy, I think you really need to think about how he fits into your list and what role you're going to have him play other than just pure healing. And maybe it is just pure healing. Maybe you just want to keep him right next to Zakana and keep her healed no matter what. He's got the propulsion system. He's got medical tools. Gives +1 to survival roll at the end of the battle. If you're kind of doing the campaign type of stuff, crystal imagers. So he's basically got deep eyes. The ether compass is a model can navigate when it cannot see seafloor or any piece of terrain. So that's kind of interesting. I think with deep eyes, that's negated a little bit because you're not going to get lost in the dark, I feel. But, to be honest, I'd have to look at that a little bit closer. I don't know exactly how that's going to help him. If you've used that and you've used it effectively, please tell me, what your experiences is there. I'd love to hear about it. But I think, again, for this model, I think he's pretty specific task. I think he could be extremely effective. I think you need to have a very solid plan. If you're going to invest 106 points, say in a 600 or 800 point list, that's a significant number of points. And I'm not saying it's wrong to have that number of points to keep other models in the game. But that's pretty good. I could see where if you kept him always within a long stick of a leader, you're activating on 2s, right? You can revive a dead but not gruesomely killed model by spending 1 action to roll a quality check with 3 successes to remove 1 wound. On 3 failures, the patient is fully dead. So, you're spending an action to get another roll of quality. So it's not just you can't just spend actions to heal. You've got a roll to spend. You've got to roll after you spend one action. You've got to roll to get that quality check to get them healed up. So pretty cool model. I have not played with it or against it, so my feedback, I guess, is kind of limited. But I think it's super interesting, and you should definitely give it a try. So the last personality that I want to talk about is the big man himself. Let's talk about that super beefcake dude called Abyssal the Immortal. He is the commander of Atalán. He's a personality model. He is a whopping 236 points. That's hero level points, and I think he is worth every penny. I played with him a couple of times. He is quality 2, combat 4. That combat 4 is really good for Ataláns. Strength 3, resistance 4, will 2. Those are really, really good secondary stats. Let's go over to his fusion blade, which is amazing. It's +2. His hypercavitation cannon is +2. His body armor is 4, which is great. He's 4 on the head, body, and legs, and 2 on the weapons. The W stands for weapon. On the armor list there. So the lore behind this guy is that he is a very ancient Atalán. He is more aggressive than the rest of his race. He's like, okay, we are not going to wait passively and try to survive. We're going to go take this, and we're not going to take no for an answer, and we are going to go secure our destiny through force. This model is really big. And it's not a modeling scale issue. It's intended to be really big. This is almost like a mech suit. So Abyssal is actually a small guy kind of in the center of this thing, kind of piloting like a little robot suit. He's not intended, the size of that model is not intended to be just basically a layer of armor around an Atalán that's like ridiculously huge. He's just a regular sized dude, maybe even a little bit shrunken, but he's basically piloting a suit. And so I love this model. I think it's fantastic. I enjoyed painting it up. Let's talk a little bit about his special abilities. He's a leader, so he's going to get pluses on his activation. So anybody within a long stick of him is going to get +1 to their activation. He's amphibious, so he can operate on land and underwater. So he's unlike some of his other living models that are not amphibious. No rebreather. His suit is fully environmentally sealed and can do life support and all that good stuff. He's a shooter long, which is great because his hypercavitation is a long shooter. So that works out really well. Ether Tech 3, he can use Ether Tech devices of that level. Big. So he is a very large model. He's +1 in hand-to-hand against smaller enemies, but ranged attacks against him are bigger. Hey, he's a bigger target, but easier to hit. He's got combo attack. This is a really great thing. So he's activating on 2s, which is wonderful. So if the model attacks in its turn and causes a wound, if it has remaining actions, it can attack again, but with a different weapon. So that's interesting. So like the only way you're going to do that is in hand-to-hand. If you hit with his fusion blade and you do a wound and you happen to have an extra action left over, you can punch him with your armored fist. Not amazing, but hey, it's there. It's there for you to use if you need to. So let's talk about his lore on the notes and info card. The oldest of the Force from the remote kingdom beneath the seas, Abyssal leads the remnants of his followers into abyssal depths. He is the most experienced warrior among his people, beings that typically favor peace over violence. So like we already talked about a few times now, he's kind of the odd duck. He is very much the General Zod of Krypton. Like, okay, I'm going to protect my people through any means necessary, and I'm going to crush you if you get in my way. And he's got the abilities to back it up. Let's talk about his weapons. Hypercavitation cannon. I love this gun. Complexity level 2. Projectile long +2. Armor break 4. So he's already at combat 4. Projectile long +2. So he's shooting. Base shooting is 6+. Dice +6. That's pretty good. Fusion blade. Hand-to-hand +2. Armor break 3. Breach +2, so he can use his fusion blade to slice open subs or science stations or whatever. Armored fist, I think that's just there so that he can have an additional attack on combo hit. And breach, you can breach through walls. Blah blah blah. We know that rule. His armor is an ancient armored suit, which is armored 4 all over except for the weapons, which we already kind of talked about. Refract. Ranged energy weapons attack or elemental conjuration spells against the wearer gets -1 to hit roll. That is part of his armored suit. And that is reflect. I'm trying to read this little card here, and I think I misspoke. Reflect. So basically, it's interesting to remember. You do need to kind of remember that his armor is reflected. Ranged energy weapons or elemental attack spells are -1 to roll on their attack roll. Powered and strength checks are +1. It's already in the stat card there, so that's why he's got such an amazing stat, or a strength stat. He's got advanced water jets, which give him a burst of speed for 1 turn under his special items. Propulsion system, so he gets swimming. Crystal imager, so he can see as if he's got dark eyes. Environmental shield, energy attacks against at -2. Pass through boiling water, fire, and lava unharmed. So if you've got some sort of scenario or special rules around, hey, maybe you're at the bottom of the ocean in a lava flow, he'll just walk right through that. Right. So I think it's interesting with the environmental shield, it's -2 against energy attacks, and reflect ranged energy weapons are also at -1. So those things stack. So trying to shoot him with an energy weapon is -3. So you're going to have a bad day trying to shoot this guy with an energy weapon. Now, the Atalans are kind of the masters of energy weapons, so unless you're playing an Atalan versus Atalan type of mission, I don't know how often that's going to come up, but it could, but just something to kind of think about. So overall, he is a really impressive package. The one thing that I feel like if you are going to take a 236 point model with a combat 4 and a +2 weapon, that's not bad. But if I'm spending that many points, that I really want to make sure that I put a crystal imager on that rifle to make sure I hit, which gives you an additional bonus. So I have put together Atalon lists where I give everyone who's got the rifles a crystal imager. Sorry, not a crystal imager, a targeting crystal. Excuse me, my apologies. Crystal imager gives you the deep eyes. A targeting crystal. You pay the points for a targeting crystal, and that gives you a bonus. And I believe it's +2. I could be wrong. Double check my math there, but it's either +1 or +2. But that is amazing. For 10 points, you boost an already pretty decent combat score for shooting. You're boosting it to legendary levels. And so you're going to connect more times than not. So like, again, when you're shooting, it's your combat skill plus your weapon, and it's just their combat skill. So anything you can do to boost that number, particularly when you're activating on quality 2s, if you're, let's say you get 3 actions and you're a long stick away, or even 2 long sticks away, you do a couple aims and a shoot, you're already -2 on their combat score, and you're adding more to yours. The chances of you hitting somebody from afar, as well as maybe doubling, maybe tripling them, ooh, that's brutal. So this guy, I like to call him the friend maker. I have played with him, and I've never played against him, but I have heard reports of people who played against him. You know who I'm talking about. I've heard reports on the Abyssal Realms Facebook page of people playing against their son who's playing this model. and I hear he's quite brutal to deal with. So I think I love him. I tend to want to put him in my list because I just love him as a model. I love him as a character. I think it really fits the scenarios and the lore. It's not that I don't love Hachuli, the kind of the more baseline leader, but I find that Allah Hall is kind of my guy when it comes to leading an Atalán warband. So that covers the personality models. Let's move into the other soldier level troop type models and talk about them. Actually, before we do that, we do need to talk about the magic that these spellcasters can use, particularly Zakana and the Conjurer of the Ether. So let's go into that really quick. So the Conjurer of the Ethers has the Conjurer keyword, and so that means that she can cast conjuration spells from the elemental and psychic magic lists. So when you look at the psychic magic lists and the elemental magic lists, there are subsections of that. So on page 85, I believe, the main rulebook for Deep Wars, you can take a look at the elemental conjuration spells, and those in particular are Phosphorescent Glow, Acoustic Resonance, and Boiling Wall. Those are all really great spells. Phosphorescent Glow basically puts down a pie plate where you can see within the depth. It kind of basically it's a tagging flare so that you can see models that might be in that zone. So camouflage and stealth effects are negated. It's a good spell to use, particularly it's situational for the Abyssal zone. I think it's pretty effective. I don't end up casting that a lot because we tend not to. We haven't played a whole lot of games in the Abyssal zone, but it definitely has its uses. The kind of the go-tos for the elemental conjuration spells are Acoustic Resonance and Boiling Wall, and you'll see those a lot in the battle reports. Acoustic Resonance is a pie plate. Basically, you drop that spell down, and then if you cast it on a scenic object, you have to roll a strength check with target value of 5+, or if it's a living model, they have to make a resistance check without armor bonus. That's very important. And if they don't get 2 successes on that, they are transfixed. So that's pretty freaking huge. That is a great spell. Boiling Wall, similarly, great spell. You can power that up. And you can drop that in a zone of a certain number of medium sticks based on how many power points you pump into it. Again, it's a resistance check with 2 or more successes or suffer a wound. On 3 failures on that one, you do 2 wounds. So again, those are not direct attack spells, but the Conjurer of the Ethers can cast those elemental conjuration spells as well as psychic magic conjuration spells. You look on page 87 of the main rule book. Really what we're talking about there is a spell called Psychic Linkage. The caster uses this spell to break into the mind of allies and give them orders. Even some models are out of the field of view. Allies are assumed to comply with this mental intrusion. So basically you can get into another model's head. The friendly models you cast this Psychic Magic Linkage spell. The spell is cast in an area effect spell on a group of models centered on one friendly target model. The target model must be within the field of view and not have an inherent resistance to psychic magic. All the other friendly models within 1 short stick radius of the original target, basically it's a blast, are also effective, but up to 5 total models. Models in the radius but outside the field of view are also affected, right, from outside the line of view of the caster. The caster may command the models to do a group activation for coordinated attacks, concentrated fire, or group channeling. So that's pretty cool. You can kind of take control of the little group and give them commands. The next spell on that particular list, the Psychic Magic Conjuration spell, is the Illusory Zone. It has a short stick radius and affects 1 depth level, giving a cylindrical shape. The Power 2 spell creates the center of a zone up to 2 medium sticks away, and a Power 3 spell puts it up to 3 medium sticks away. A model moving into the Illusory Zone or having a zone cast around it must make a will check to avoid confusion. 1 or 2 successes mean the model is not affected. On 2 successes, the model is not affected. But if you do 2 failures, the model The model can activate the next turn and will try to leave the zone, but must make another will check. Essentially, models in the zone can defend themselves as usual, but get -2 to their combat score. So basically, they just kind of stand around being dumb and confused. The third one is a zone of terror. Basically, that drops down a radius of 1 short stick. They have to make a morale check on 3 dice if you move into the zone or activate within the zone. On 1 failure, the model must immediately make 1 move towards the closest table edge. On 2 failures, must make 2 moves, and so forth, so on and so forth. So that's pretty powerful too. So that is what the elemental, what the Conjurer of the Ethers can do. Those conjuration spells. If we take a look at Zakana, she is a great radio here, folks. Let's go find her in my cards. There she is. She is an elementalist, so she can cast all the elemental spells and gains +1 to spell casting rolls. So every elemental spell, including the attack spells, she can cast, which are, there's some really great spells in there. So there's Energy Beam, Hydrothermal Eruption, Pressure Wave, Phosphorescent Glow, Acoustic Resonance, Boiling Wall, all that good stuff. So she's got quite the litany of spells that she can cast. Really powerful spell casting there. Got quite the toolbox. And either one of those casters, if you're looking for more offensive punch, definitely Zakana is your person. If you're looking for more kind of control type of stuff, you can get a little bit of a cheaper caster and go with that Conjurer of the Ethers. So that basically wraps up the magic abilities of the faction. So let's go back and kind of on original plan, let's go back and talk about those trooper models now. All right, let's talk about trooper models for the Ancients of Atalán. And let's start, I think this one's actually my favorite troop for the Ancients of Atalán in the Assault Soldier. 67 points, quality 4, combat 2, standard secondary stats for an Ancient of Atalán. 5 up strength and resistance, 4 up will. Get the armor bonus of +2. Good body armor for an Ancient of Atalán. That's pretty good body armor. That hypercav rifle of +2 kind of mitigates a little bit of that combat too. I love this model. I mean, the model is great. I love the sculpt. It's fantastic. The only thing I just so desperately wish it was Combat 3. Then it would be awesome. I think at Combat 2 it's good. But hey, I'll take it. Hand-to-hand combat weapon of a micro edge blade +1. Again, if you're using that, something has gone horribly wrong. Special abilities: shooter long, and a projectile long hypercavitation rifle. That is money right there. The long shooter really makes this guy shine in terms of he can really kind of reach out and put the hurt at range with that rifle. And so that rifle being projectile long +2 is great. So again, with the combat 2, not amazing. Spend the 10 points, put a crystal targeting array or targeting crystal on this. Helps a ton. Puts him at 77 points, but at 77 points with the targeting crystal, amazing. Let's go back up to the special abilities. Ether Tech 2, pretty standard stuff there. Shooter long, we understand what that means. Marine, again, has to wear a breather. Going to the back of this card, I guess one of the other downsides, again, you're only paying 67 points for him, so I guess it makes sense that he's only got 2 wounds on the body and 1 wound on the head. These guys, if they get hit, they're going down. So you can't get too emotionally attached to them, but they can actually, if you can keep them out of range and kind of keep them kind of dancing just at the beauty of this model is that they're cheap. And if you can kind of keep them dancing at range, they've got long range. Most every other shooter in the game is a medium range stick. If you can kind of keep them activating with a leader close by, the quality 4 means that you've got to have a leader close. But you pair these guys with a Lahal, And they can do some work. Again, they're not going to do work like a Lahal does, but again, it's only 67 points. So notes and info on this guy, again, on the back of the card. These are the main troops of the Force of Atalán. Well trained in the use of the hypercavitation weapons, which is reflected in the +2. That's pretty good for a bonus on a stat for a weapon. And wearing armored combat suits. They're physically weak, but they make up for it with precise attacks against vulnerable targets. So that hypercavitation rifle is really cool in the sense that it's projectile long +2, armor break 2. Pretty decent armor break on that. Not going to complain about that one bit. It does require a reload. You take what you get. That doesn't mesh well with a quality 4 model. I think, I guess if I were ever to wish something for this particular model, it would be either that it is quality 3 or that it is combat 3. Move one of those stats to 3, and this guy would be absolutely auto-include all day long. Micro-edge blade +1, hand-to-hand, precise, and fragile. Again, if you're getting into hand-to-hand with this guy, you're probably up against the wall. Precise is nice. It's interesting on a hand-to-hand weapon where you get the bonuses on a subsystem. Fragile, that basically that if you roll a 1, bad things can happen to your weapon. And that only applies to the micro-edge blade. Armor, combat suit, complexity level 2 with 2s across the board for armor level. That's not bad. That armor is not going to save you, but it's nice. It's nice that it's there. And it also reflects. This is something, again, I wish the times I've played Ancients of Atalán, I tend to forget this. Do not forget the reflect if someone shoots an ranged energy weapon or an elemental attack spell against you, against this model, -1 combat score. -1 combat score. And that's because of the reflective material in their armor. Again, propulsion system, dive ascend, crystal imager, it's got deep eyes. So again, in a 67 point package, this is pretty good. You're probably going to get, if you, I might activate these later in the turn, make sure that they stay close to a leader, activating them on 3s. You get an aim. You're going to get 2 or 3 actions, hopefully. You get an aim and a shot. You've got some decent capability of putting some hurt down the field. So Assault Soldier, I think, is one of my favorite trooper models for the game. Really good model. It's good to have that as a basic troop in your list. Let's move on to one of the other trooper models in the Atalán Force is the 117 point Elite Soldier. Quality 4, Combat 4, basic stats, strength and resistance of 5s, will of 3, that's good. Beam rifle of +2, micro edge blade of +1, body armor of 2. Hey Greg, this looks just like the Assault Soldier, but he's got combat 4. Wow, that looks great, right? Ether Tech 2, shooter long. We look at his beam rifle, energy long +2, precise refract. This is okay. So now we're pushing out damage at long range at dice +6 minimum. That's good. Ether Tech 2 is pretty normal. We know what that means. Shooter long, we know what that means. Marine, Iron Will, immune to madness. That's pretty cool. That doesn't come up too much, but when it does, that's pretty cool. Rapid Shot can use an action for another ranged attack if the previous shot wounds an enemy. Can only be used with a weapon without reload. Which is great because he comes with weapons without reload. So we were thinking about that, so obviously that's great. So Greg, why isn't this guy your favorite? I'm torn. This guy is really good. The quality 4 on a 100+ point model, I can live with that. Combat 4 with the +2, body armor 2. Geez, Greg, he's got a ghost mine too. Look at that. Projectile attack with combat score 6, no roll. You plant a mine with 2 actions, auto shoots any model moving towards it within a short radius. Ooh, a little bit of board control with this guy. So why isn't this guy your favorite? I mean, what's not to love, right? Well, you're right. Okay, look, I do like him. And now I'm actually waffling. But here's the deal. For almost double the points, you're still getting one shot, right? At 117 points, this guy is almost double the points of an assault soldier. Now, granted, the quality of the shooting from the elite soldier is superior in every way. So let's take it to another extreme. If I gave a targeting crystal to an elite soldier, get a bonus there, combat 4 plus 2 for your rifle, plus the bonus for the targeting crystal. Okay, now we're talking legendary. Now we're talking about maybe doubling, tripling somebody when I hit them. And you will hit them with those kind of numbers. But it's one guy, right? And he's going to die just as easy as an assault soldier. So what you're really talking about here is, because you got one wound to the head, one wound to the body, or 2 wounds to the body, body armor 2. That armor, it's good. I'm glad it's there. It will not save you. But 2 shots versus 1. So do you, like with a crystal imager, I keep saying crystal imager, with a targeting crystal on an assault soldier for 77 points, do you want to have 2 decent shots? Or for 127 points, do you want 1 elite soldier with 1 legendary shot? Now, there's something to be said for that. So, maybe, I'm hovering over an order in my Antimatter Games miniatures cart here. So, maybe a few elite soldiers will find their way onto my painting table soon. But I guess one of the things that I think about with this guy is that he's very toolboxy, which I like. The elite soldier is very toolboxy. We're starting to talk like leader level points for a quality 4 model. That's not particularly, he's just as survivable as any other Atalán. So, you kind of have to weigh against, okay, well, do you want bodies or do you want, great capability? And I think with the elite soldier, I want to get him on the table. I should really get him on the table and look at it. But as I think about it, there's a conversation to be had, like, how do you want this to work? But again, at 117 points, you're paying for all the extras like the ghost mine, the beam pistol in addition to the beam rifle, and whatnot. So let's go over some more of the armor stuff. So again, the combat suit, 2s across the board, reflect elemental attacks or ranged energy weapons, propulsion system, and crystal imager, so deep eyes. So all kind of the standard kit there. So again, love this model. I think he's a good trooper. You just kind of have to weigh a little bit when you're putting your list together. The points add up really fast, right? You really got to make sure you keep this guy protected. So let's move on to another trooper model called the Reconnaissance Scout. Now, I've only ever played against this guy, I think, once. I've never played this guy. So my feedback on him is going to be kind of couched on just me being able to analyze the stats. But at 99 points, Reconnaissance Scout, Quality 4, Combat 3, standard stats, secondary stats for Atalán, Micro Edge Blade +1, Beam Pistol +1, Body Armor 2, not bad. Mounted under special abilities, that's cool. Hand-to-hand +1 versus non-mounted figures, that's great. Again, at Combat 3 and +1 on your blade. I'm not sure I really want him in hand-to-hand that much. Rider body wounds filled next to result in modeled death. So what that means is that there's a body bike and there's a body rider. So you you kill the body on the bike, and then it moves to it. Basically, you kind of say you shoot the bike out from under the dude, and then you start applying the wounds to the rider who has two body wounds himself. So shooter medium with weapons of medium, that sort of stuff. Normal shooting. Ether Tech 2, Marine, standard maneuverable. This is pretty cool. No penalty for difficult terrain if you move over it. Ranged attacks against it at -1 and cancels the big penalty. Can turn a corner with one move. So kind of like the Direfish Lizard on the Scaly Horde. You don't have to move in a straight line. You can curve that line with this guy. So that's actually that's a really nice thing to have. Long move. This guy moves with a long move. So he's fast, right? Beam Pistol, Energy Medium +1, Precise Refract, Micro Edge Blade +1 Refract. Combat, 2s across the board, standard stuff, Propulsion System, Crystal Imager, all the good stuff. I guess my thinking on this guy is that, he's not bad. He's 99 points. I think where this guy excels is I would not really kind of think of this person or this model as a combat role. I would think of this model would be exceptional in games that have like salvage, where you're trying to get treasures, or backfield objective, or deep enemy territory objective grabbing. That long move is really good. The problem is that he's quality 4. You're going to outrun your leadership bubble pretty quick. And at 99 points, I think I see him. It's hard to get full value out of that 99 points because he's probably just going to be, again, outrunning that leadership bubble pretty quickly. So your mileage might vary on this guy. I think there's definitely game with the long move. I think there's definitely game with, there is the sense of killing the bike and then killing the rider. There's a little bit of survivability here with the maneuverable as well. Attacks against it are not quite as easy to hit. I think it would be interesting to see this guy on the table. I think this is one of those more situational models where you've got to find the right role for him that doesn't necessarily outrun his coverage, because once you outrun your leader, you're activating him on 4-ups, and doing multiple activations on 4s is a very fundamentally different question than doing multiple activations on 3s. So I like him. I think he's going to be a little bit situational. And I believe that covers all of the trooper models for the Ancients of Atalán. So unlike the Dark Mariners in the last game, or the last video, the Dark Mariners have lots and lots of model support. One, because they just have a lot of models to begin with in Deep Wars, but they also have double the models because there is a line of them in Shadowsea. The analog to the Ancients of Atalán in Shadowsea are the Axamalan Empire, which are kind of like the Amazons and the Beastmen. We won't cover that in this faction focus video. That will be for a later time. But those are basically the troop types that you can apply to your Ancients of Atalán list. Next up, we are going to talk about the mechanical constructs that the Ancients of Atalán can use. And again, if you're going to put constructs, you're going to want Matlal the Elder in there to help control them. But they've got a pretty powerful lineup of mech constructs that can really help you do a lot of work. All right, let's begin our coverage of the mechanical constructs for the Ancients of Atalán with this fella right here, the 98-point Tyranniform Light Assault Mech, or as I like to call it, Shark Mech. I mean, it is clearly a shark, so I think it's legit to call it Shark Mech. So Shark Mech, 98 points, Quality 4, Combat 3, Mech Construct, secondary stat line of 4s across the board. Armor applies to the resistance rolls. Mech Jaws of +1 in combat. Lightning Torpedo of +1 in shooting. Body armor of 3. That's pretty darn good. For a 98-point mech, combat 3, body armor 3, that is respectable. I like it. So it's big. Special abilities are big, which is good for it in hand-to-hand, but it's not so good when it gets shot at. Artificial Mech Construct, which is great because it's immune to poison, psychic magic spells, morale, and madness, and it cannot be gruesomely killed. But the flip side to that is if you're going to have this mech, you are well informed to have Matlal the Elder there, or someone with a control device. Matlal's better because he can control multiples of the mechs, but if you've got a control device, you can control one. He is a medium shooter, and he's Marine. So for this guy, you need an anti-grav tech device. So with the mechanical constructs, it's a little bit different. If you want these guys to play well in Shadowsea, it's not a rebreather, it's an anti-grav tech device, which is 10 points. So that applies to all of them, I believe. And so this guy is a medium shooter, and his main weapon is a projectile medium +1 lightning torpedo, which is armor break 2. It's got shock and homing. So this is actually a really cool weapon. If weapon causes a wound in combat, the defender must roll a resistance check with 2 successes or be transfixed. So that's pretty cool, especially if you've got resistances on models that are like 5-ups and they're maybe grouped together a little bit. You drop a couple of these in there and you can get a whole swath of bad guys transfixed, which is pretty cool. Homing is really good. So homing ignores tactical cover. So if there's like semi behind a rock or something, there's no escaping this torpedo or any other partial cover. And the shot may change direction once to go around an obstacle. So that's pretty cool. May fire at a target that is moved behind full cover on the same turn that the target hides if it started within the shooter's field of view. So like if this guy at the beginning of the turn had line of sight to the Tyrannoform mech, and then later moved behind a rock, completely obscured, and then it becomes the Atalán's turn, that counts. So you can actually, if someone, you can't go duck behind cover on this guy's torpedoes. So that's really pretty darn cool. And so this guy's also got, in terms of armor, light alloy plating, head, body, locomotion, and weapons. Or head, body, and locomotions are all 3. Weapons are 2. So that's pretty decent armor. Armor 3, again, it's not going to save you in all situations, but it's better than most of them. Going back to the weapons real quick, big mechanical jaws, hand +1, armor break 1. I think it's pretty standard. It's got the +1 on the weapon, so it's not a complete disaster. But I would not be using this guy charging into hand-to-hand too much unless you've got a pretty assured kill or you need a flanking bonus on something that you're pretty sure that you're going to get with another model. This guy shines really when you hold him back kind of midfield or a couple sticks away. You keep him next to Matlal the Elder to get the activation bonus, and you just lob these homing torpedoes into folks. So the thing that I really like about this guy is that, line of sight isn't necessarily that important with this guy. He's only 98 points. I think he's a great buy at 98 points. I'm ordering one of these guys to put into my warband. My Atalán warband is a little bit small right now. I'm building it up, but this one's definitely got a place in my warband. So I really like this guy. I encourage you to get him in your collection. So next up, in terms of the artificial mechanical constructs, is the Exoform Salvage Mech Construct at 82 points, combat 2, quality 4. Mechanical claw is a weapon and body armor of 3. Mechanical claw +0. Strength is 3. Resistance is 5, and will of 4. He's a salvager. So this is your salvager. If you are doing the treasure seeking or the salvage mission, this guy is a pretty good include. He's 82 points, which is pretty decent. He's not really much of a combat force to be reckoned with, but that's not why you bring him. He's got a micro edge blade for weapons, which is +1, and a mechanical claw, which is +0. So, this guy, if he has to be in a fight, he's okay. The combat 2, you just really don't want this guy to be fighting or honestly to be getting shot at. You want him going after treasures. So, let's go through his special rules or special ability. Salvager +1 bonus on the treasure tables. Artificial mech, immune to poison, psychic magic spells, etc. So that's great. Ether Tech 2, amphibious. Operate on land and underwater, which is great. Powerful, +1 strength checks already in the stats. So that's good. He's a 6-legged or an 8-legged thing there. I guess he can kind of handle his own and stay put if something's trying to drag him. He's big, so that does help him in hand-to-hand. It gives him a +1 against smaller opponents. But again, This model is not really something that you want to be taking into combat on any regular basis. So he's a little bit of a unitasker. He does not do a lot above and beyond treasure seeking, but I think that's generally pretty true across most of the factions, that the treasure seeking models tend to do that pretty well, and we don't tend to really rely on them to do other things. But if you need to get this guy into combat, my recommendation would be to make sure that he's supported. He's probably good for a flanking attack. He is on a bigger base, so he's a little bit harder to get around. But don't put this guy unsupported into combat and you'll be just fine. Okay, so that is the Exoform Salvage Mech construct. Now we go to one of my favorite mech constructs for the Ancients of Atalán, and that is the Mantiform Hunter-Killer Mech construct. At 167 points, he is Quality 4, Combat 4, 4s down the board on his secondary stats. The Mecha Tentacles is +1, his Hypercavitation Cannon is +2, Body Armor of 3. What I really like about this guy, let's look at his special abilities. He's tough. So what that means is that you can't double him if you rolled in combat and the normal result is doubled, like you do 2 wounds. He's not fallen, right? It also doubles the wounds on the body, which is fantastic. So tough gives him extra wounds and only fallen on or dazed on a double or triple. So sorry, if he's not fallen on a double or triple, you've got to double him in order to get him fallen. If you do just a single wound to him, he is not fallen, which is great because you don't want to be spending another action on an expensive Quality 4 model to spend an action to get back into the game based on taking pinking off 1 wound. He's amphibious, so he can do land and water. Big, that's great for him in hand-to-hand combat. If he gets shot at, it's +1 to him, so pretty standard. Shooter long, that's great, because if we look at his weapons, they are long-range weapons as well. So he can shoot with the long stick, which is fantastic. Fast load, does not need to reload a weapon. That's huge. We'll talk about that in a minute. So the lore on this guy, as we move to the back of the card, is this it's a manta ray shaped mech. It's intended to look like a manta ray. This ray shaped mech is a floating fortress bristling with weapons. It is to be avoided all other forces unless they manage to bring out explosive charges or heavy weapons to knock it out. So this guy, it truly is a little bit difficult to kill. It's got the beef. It's one of the most survivable. It might even be the most survivable model in the Atalán force. Like I said, it's got tough, so it's got 6 wounds on its body. The claws have 2. The controls, which is his head, has 3, and locomotion has 4. So this guy's pretty stout. It's going to take, you're going to have to dedicate some effort to get this guy off the table. Let's look at the weapons. Hypercavitation Cannon. He's got 2 of those. Those are the weapons on the side. It's projectile long +2, armor break 4, reload 0 with fast load. So if you apply the fast load to that, he doesn't have to spend an action to reload. The beam cannon is energy long +3, armor break 1, precise, and refract. So precise is +2 when targeting a subsystem. Refract, ranged attacks into tactical cover -2, murky. So those weapons don't necessarily do well when you're firing into tactical cover, just something to kind of pay attention to. The mechanical tentacles are entanglable and unbreakable. They're hand-to-hand +1. This model does not shine trying to get into hand-to-hand. I mean, if he gets into hand-to-hand, he's big with a combat 4 and a +1 weapon, so he's not bad. But you need this guy to kind of hang back or at least hang midfield. And this guy's taking pot shots. Really, where you want this guy is you want him taking leg shots or head shots from across the board and disabling enemies that way. This guy's got, good armor across the board. So head and body of 3, locomotion of 3, and weapons 2. And the reflect armor adds +3 to resistance rolls unless beaten by armor break. And reflect also ranged energy weapons and elemental attack spells are -1 to CS. So that's a little bit situational like we've talked about before, but that's good. We've got a crystal imager, so operates as if he has deep eyes. The thing that I really like about this guy is that he can really lay down some hurt at long range. So thinking about that, he's also got this special rule called rapid shot. And what does that mean? What rapid shot is all about is this. It's unfortunately, I think there's an omission on this card, is it doesn't actually show up on this card. But here's what rapid shot does. A model with the rapid shot ability can make one or more additional ranged attacks if the first one hits and injures the enemy, similar to combo attack. So, but for shooting, requiring a wound with the first attack. So as long as you've got actions to spend to make additional shots, if you hit and you wound with the first shot, you can spend an action to do another shot. So this is really interesting on this model because you can kind of chain shots as long as you hit the first one. So a really good tactic is if you get a really good activation, you might want to aim and shoot to make sure that you connect and wound. And then if you've got another wound, or if you've got another action, spend it on shooting again. So additionally, any ranged weapon the model has in its profile that does not require reloading can potentially fire with rapid shot. A model with rapid shot and fast load is a dangerous character. So that is precisely this mech construct. That is really what this mech is all about. So using those weapons with the fast load and rapid shot, really good combination, but you've got to get pretty good on your activations. If you do a heroic activation, you could do potentially 2 aimed rapid shots. If the first shot hits and causes a wound, the character can use another action point to attack again, gaining an advantage if the defender is fallen, transfixed, or dazed, or fire at an entirely different target. So you can up to 3 shots may be used by using rapid shots. So you can actually get up to 3. You'd have to have a boatload of actions in order to do that. But it's possible, right? So this makes this Mantiform Hunter-Killer Mech construct, this is a dangerous model to tangle with. And I recommend every list of the Ancients of Atalán to have at least one of those. I think I've played against a list that had 2. I might have even played against one that had 3. That's getting pretty legendary, and that's a lot of points to sink into a model, into a mech constructs. But putting this guy near Matlaw and trying to get multiple activations and getting lots of different shots off, this thing is brutal. So. And the model is gorgeous. I mean, look at that thing. It clearly is a manta, patterned after the biological creature. I think it's a fantastic sculpt. It looks beautiful. It's a pretty big model, so you can go crazy with it with your paint job. So really encourage you to get this in your collection if you play Atalans, if you haven't already. All right, next up for the Ancients of Atalán with the mechanical constructs is the great radio here, the Hydroform Light Combat Mech construct, weighing in at 106 points. It's quality 4, combat 3, lightning tentacles of +2, and a beam rifle of +2. Standard Atalán secondary stat line, body armor of 3. You know what? For 106 points, this guy is absolutely fantastic. So let me read you a little bit about this guy. So he's artificial, so he's immune to poison and psychic magic, etc., and madness and blah, blah, blah. That's great. Ether Tech 2, pretty standard, shooter long, which is fantastic because his weapons are shoot long. He's Marine, so again, if you want him in Shadow Sea, you got to add the anti-grav device. Here's the deal. This guy's got +2 on both his combat weapons and his ranged weapons. So even though he's combat 3, you're swinging at dice +5 base, right? Dice +5 base with this guy. So let's take a look at those lightning tentacles. I know I say that you don't necessarily want to get into hand-to-hand combat with Atalans, but I'm not going to say that this guy's an exception, but he's a little bit of an exception because dig this. His lightning tentacles, hand-to-hand +2, shock, entangle, armor break, unbreakable. Shock. If weapon causes a wound in combat, defender must roll a resistance check with 2 successes or be transfixed. On top of that, entangle. If you win a combat by 1 or more, normal damage and victim must roll a strength check with 2 successes or be entangled and lose turn. Subsequent turns, victim must use 1 action to roll a strength check with 2 successes to get free. So you can really tie up a trooper with this hand-to-hand. Now, again, I'm not sure that I would use that as my first go-to action with this guy, but this guy's got a little bit of game when it comes to hand-to-hand combat. Really where you want this guy is to be using his beam rifle, energy long 2, precise and refract. So he's shooting at dice plus 5 right out the gate. Not bad at all. Not bad at all. Body armor 3 is really good. Not going to save you against really hard hits, but that's going to actually do you some good, particularly with regular trooper models and hand-to-hand or with shooting. So solid choice. He's only 106 points. You get a lot of goodness with 106 points out of this guy. So I think he's definitely a go-to staple in any Ancients of Atalán force that's going to have any mech constructs in it. All right. So moving on to the next mech construct is called the Miraniform Stealth Mech Construct. At 85 points, he's quality 4, combat 3, no real bonuses on the weapons to really speak of. In fact, there's none. No ranged attack. He's got metal jaws of +0, body armor 3, which is great. Standard secondary stat line. Artificial mech construct, ether tech, marine swimming, electric skin, and stealth. So this guy is, and I say this in the most ingratiating, positive context as I can, this guy is kind of a pain in the butt. If you really want to drive your opponent crazy, this guy's ability to do the shock with the electric skin and stealth is really fantastic. So stealth allows you to approach without being attacked. So stealth makes him immune to ranged spell attacks, and ranged attacks and spell attacks have adjacent to partial cover, negated for that cover if attacks or cast spells. So this thing attacks, which it can't because it's got is melee attacks, is that it's going to creep up. You're going to hug cover. You're going to creep this guy up. And then when he gets into hand-to-hand, if you attack, if he causes or suffers a wound in hand-to-hand combat, the opponent must roll a resistance check with 2 successes or be transfixed. I have had trooper models transfixed for multiple turns because of this little pain in the butt. He's only 85 points. Now, he's not a combat master. He's only combat 3. So you really got to pick your targets with this guy. He's not going to win combat that often, but if he does a mighty blow, if you get really good on your activation, you get a mighty blow. So it is a little bit situational, but he's only 85 points, which is really fantastic. You can get a couple of these guys in your list and really tie down a flank or tie up an enemy that isn't necessarily a great enemy, but even if you tie up a couple models in deep wars, that's a big impact to your opponent and can really kind of change the flow of the game. So again, I use this as a distraction piece and as a kind of a board control piece. I've never played with it, but it's been played against me, particularly when you put this against regular trooper models that might not have great resistances. This, and not necessarily great combat, this guy can really hurt the other player's plans. And it's very much a nuisance piece and has to be dealt with. So that gives you some kind of concept as where to go with this one. All right. Next up on the mech construct Pareto here is the Carangiform Mech Shoal. So really what this is a swarm of mechanical piranha, which I think is fantastic. Whoever came up with this concept is freaking brilliant. I love it. 78 points, quality 4, combat 3. No real combat modifiers to speak of. Armor 3, standard secondary stat line, artificial mech construct, shoaling, which is special, opportunistic, and savage. The thing that I love about this thing is that it's savage. Check this out. Shoaling is an aggregate that moves and attacks as a social unit. So this is a swarm of mechanical piranha. It's not one piranha, it's a bunch of piranha. So it's an aggregate that moves and attacks as a social unit. If multiple shoal bases are in the battle, they must be adjacent. Ranged attacks and spells have no effect unless they have blast or zone area. So you can't target this with, anything ranged. You can't target this with a ranged attack unless it's a zone or a blast. So that rules out a lot of shooting weapons against it. Can only be attacked to the body. Concentrated fire called by a leader affects the shoal at -2, even if the weapon has no blast effects. That's interesting. So really what this is, it's kind of this, what that really means is it's this dispersed, it's hard to target you don't have to worry so much about this thing getting shot, right? Opportunistic gets +1 on activation rolls when they have a fallen or transfixed foe within a short distance. That's a little bit specific and a little bit situational. Like, you're not often going to have a fallen or transfixed foe within a short distance of it when you're actually activating it. So I think that's nice. I think that's very situational. Savage is fantastic. I think that's very fluffy. It makes a lot of sense for Piranha. So it inflicts +1 wound when doubling or tripling the opponent's combat score. So you can, again, the combat score plus the weapons, you're not likely to get a very good chomp on somebody you're actually gonna double them. It could happen, but I think it's a little bit situational. But if you end up doing a charge or a mighty blow with this guy, it's certainly possible. Again, nothing really to speak of or write home about with the hand-to-hand weapon there. No bonuses there. Great armor on the head and the body and the locomotion, again, just like any other mech construct. Again, armor 3 isn't going to save you against a really hard hit, but it's there if you need it, right? So that's pretty good. So I really like this. I've never played against it, and I've never played it myself. I kind of dig it. I think it's cool. Probably going to end up in my collection at some point. All right, the last model that we've got for review here is called the Copiform Repair Mech. At 68 points, this guy is quality 4, combat 3, standard secondary stat line, no real bonuses on the weapons, body armor 3, artificial mech construct, engineer, ether tech 2, and marine. So really what this guy is all about is he is the engineer of the group. He can help repair ether tech devices of 1 and 2 by rolling a quality check with successes. If an item is broken and no more repair attempts on it, things like that. Can repair 1 wound per turn on an adjacent artificial mech construct by using 1 action. That's huge. And he's only 67 points, or 68 points, excuse me. I have this model. I have not assembled him or painted him, but I like the notion of, he's relatively cheap. It is 67 points, and his really only function is in my mind, is that you're going to be repairing mechs, or maybe you put him on the sub to repair the sub as an engineer. If you end up putting the sub on the table, I think that's really good. I see a use for it. I think it's very useful. I think you've got to weigh in. Does 68 points worth of repair to your mechs worth it? I think it, and my gut tells me it is. If you can keep a couple of your mechs in the game for another turn or two because of this guy, with really precise shooting, I think that's a win. You just have to figure out how it fits into your list and what goes away if you end up putting this guy in there. So we're not going to cover the sub. That's the Sea Wraith, a beautiful looking model. At 206 points, the Sea Wraith looks beautiful. I have one. It's on the table for assembly. I've never played it, but we're not going to cover that here. That's another episode. So that covers basically everything in terms of units for the Ancients of Atalán. And let me know what you think of my review there. Do you have questions? Do you have thoughts? Am I wrong somewhere, or do you agree with me? What do you think? What do you where would you put your points if you were putting together a list for the Ancients of Atalán? What's your favorite list? Let's talk about that and put that comment in on here on the video. So now we're going to move on to the third question: is what is cool about the Ancients of Atalán? So when I think of what's cool about the Ancients of Atalán, what I think of is the aesthetic and the backstory in particular. I think they're a very cool shooty faction. They've got the very precise shooting on a lot of their models. Like I said, not a whole lot to speak of in terms of hand-to-hand, but when I think of the Ancients of Atalán, the thing that I think of that makes them cool is, okay, they're a great shooting faction, very precise shots. The aesthetic, clearly they're kind of this elder race. It's very streamlined and trim and agile, and they've acclimatized to the deep. And so, if you're thinking of those classic Atlanteans and kind of the classic good guys in a way, but I think there is also the thing that I find the most cool about the Ancients of Atalán is that there's is sort of a tale of sorrow, right? They're a declining race. They're, they're not. It's not a growing race. They're kind of dying. They're looking for their beginnings. They're looking for their origins. They're a little bit lost. They're displaced. They're on the decline, and they are fighting and scrapping, not necessarily in a violent way, but they're trying to find a way back to their place in the world. And it's a little bit mournful, as well as a little bit hopeful. So I think it's really kind of cool that there's that distinct blend of those two sort of concepts when you think of this faction. They can be very powerful. I think they can also, on the video battle reports, we have often stated that we've sort of had challenges kind of unlocking them. I think in our last battle report with them, we did a really good job. I think it might be a play style thing. If you can get great activations on these guys and you can get good shots off on the subsystems, you can quickly pick apart your opponent at a range, and that's very powerful. So I think it's a really cool faction. I've got more models on the way for this faction. I'm going to play them some more myself. And I guess the other thing that I think is cool about this faction is that their constructs, I think, are some of the best looking in the game. Not to say that I don't like the Fortune Hunters constructs. I think they look fine. I think they look wonderfully bulky and kind of very kind of human, and they look very functional, but not necessarily very elegant. I look at the constructs for the Ancients of Atalán. There's a grace and an elegance paired with their deadliness. So I think that's super cool. So I think, that's my perspective. What's your perspective? If you play Ancients of Atalán, what do you like about them? So let's move on to question number 4 now. This will be our final question. What have I learned playing against them? I think, or playing with them or playing against them. So I've been on both sides of Ancients of Atalán, mostly on the receiving end. What I have learned is that their magic is very powerful, and their precise shooting, it can be extraordinarily deadly. So be paying attention to those. If you're playing against tech against Ancients of Atalán, generally they're going to have Matlal the Elder in there if they've got mechs of any kind, and that probably will. If you take him out, then the opponent is really hamstrung. So if you can find ways to eliminate Matlal early, you're going to have a much better go of dealing with the Ancients of Atalán, particularly their mecha. Other than that, the way that I have found that the best way to sort of handle Ancients of Atalán is you've got to get in hand to hand with them, because they're not going to they just don't last in hand to hand. That being said, Alahal is pretty brutal. So if you think that applies to him, you're sorely mistaken. So you're going to have to find ways to tech against him. But if you're playing Ancients of Atalán, you've got to find ways of kind of getting creative with your spells and your zonings and blocking line of sight so that you can set up your troops for multiple turns of long range shots. So I think maybe the one faction that they might struggle with in particular is going to be the Nereids, because the Nereids are so fast that they can close so quickly with that great qualities that they have, is that you're going to have to find interesting ways to kind of keep them off of you, probably with spells, getting against the resistances. Some of them don't have particularly great resistances. You're going to have to find ways that spells are going to help you kind of carry the day. So that's kind of really my thinking in terms of what my experience is playing against them or with them are. So tell me about yours. And I think that about wraps it up for my Deep Wars faction focus on the Ancients of Atalán. I hope you've enjoyed this video blog. Let me know what you think, and if you have anything that you have found particularly useful, or if you'd like to see carried across to the next faction focus, please let me know and drop me a line in this video, and we'll be sure to include it next time. So thank you again for listening, and enjoy playing the Ancients of Atalán. I know I do, playing with them or against them, and we'll see you next time.